Hi everyone. My name is Sarah, and I'm the Communications and Advocacy Manager here at the YWCA National Capital Area. And my co-host for this discussion today is...
Hi everyone, I'm Dana Campbell. I'm the Director of Education and Training Programs, also at the YWCA National Capital Area.
And we're glad and excited to welcome you here today for this discussion about the 2020 census. At the YWCA, our mission is to eliminate racism and empower women. And in 2020, part of this work includes encouraging civic participation, including completing the census and voting. Both of these actions are an important part of this mission. So if we're going to be talking about the census today, but if you aren't registered to vote, let us know in the chat or in the Facebook comments, and we can help you do that today. Dana?
As you may know, the 2020 census is currently underway in our community. Starting early this year, you should have received notification in the mail about completing the census for your household. You have the option to complete it online, via the phone, or via email. Also, in recent days, you may have seen the census workers in your community reaching out to you, knocking on doors, and talking to your neighbors who haven't completed the census. We have until September 30th now to complete the census, which helps determine lots of things in your community, including funding for social programs, funding for adult education, funding for your government, and we want to make sure that we are all counted in our communities in the census this year. The census takes 10 minutes, just 10 minutes to complete to make a difference for the next 10 years. However, we still know there's lots of questions that you may have, and that's why we're here with you today. We want to give this opportunity to you to have a space to answer questions, to ask questions that you still may have on your mind about the census. And so at this time, we want to open it up to our guests. Sarah, to you.
To begin, you get to hear from Melissa Bird from the DC Census 2020. And then following up will be Deborah Kennedy from the National Coalition of Literacy. They are going to share some information about how the census affects DC residents, but also how it affects adult literacy and family education. After that, we'll have time for questions. We have some questions that we've already queued up, but feel free to ask your own. You can add them in the chat or place them in the comments on Facebook. But first, I want to get started playing a really quick video from YWCA USA, specifically about our Why Women Count campaign, which is our census campaign. So. Sorry, folks. All right, here we go.
Every 10 years, the census counts all people living in the United States. It determines political representation and how federal funding is distributed for 10 years. The census is safe. Your answers can only be used to produce statistics. Your community deserves representation and resources. Let's make sure they get them by getting an accurate count.
We all count.
For more information, visit ywca.org.
Thank you. And now I will turn over to our esteemed guest today, Melissa Bird.
Great, thank you. I love that video. I hadn't seen that before. So welcome to everyone. As Dana said, we are moving towards the finish line with the census now. Originally, the census was extended to October 31st due to COVID. And just recently, the administration has changed that date to September 30th. So we have even less time to get more people counted. As of yesterday, DC households had about 61% of DC households have self-responded, which is great. We want everyone to self-respond on their own, but that means we still have close to 40% of households in DC that have not responded. And when we look at where most of those households are, they are almost always in areas that we know have a higher concentration of low-income households, African-American households, and immigrant households, which means when these households don't get counted, they are at the greatest risk of not being counted for 10 years. They are also harder to reach with the door-to-door enumerators, or what we call the census door knockers, when they come around. That is why it is so critical that you self-respond. I always tell people, don't wait for a knock on the door. Okay, you can self-respond all the way until the end of September 30th. So we're down to less than 5 weeks to get almost 40% of DC households counted. And again, you can do that online at 2020census.gov, and you can do that in 13 languages. You can do it over the phone. You can just call and actually talk to a person in 13 languages. If you still have the hard copy that was mailed to you, you can do that as well, and you don't need any stamp for it. So if you still don't want to self-respond, someone will be coming around to your house. These are the US Census takers, and I'm going to share my screen and show you a little bit about what to look for. I'm getting a message saying only one person can share at a time. So Sarah, can you pull it up for me?
I can, one moment.
Okay. So right now, DC does have the enumeration starting, and this is when folks from the US Census are going to come around, knock on your door. If they don't get you the first time, they may make multiple visits to your house. Generally, so time of day, they'll be there anywhere from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. If someone's knocking on your door at midnight, that is not a US Census taker. They will always have protective gear on. They will have a mask on, and then they will have an ID badge, and they will show you that, and it will come from the Department of Commerce. It'll have an expiration on it and their photo. So always make sure that they show you a photo ID, and then they will have a device with them. You can also text DOOR to 442-020 and find out if census takers are out in your neighborhood that day. So that's another way. So again, if someone does knock on your door from the census, please open your door. Please provide that information. It is safe, it's confidential. It really is less than 10 minutes almost. Most people I talk to, they've been doing it in like 6 or 7 minutes, honestly. So, again, we really do want to encourage you just to self-respond. Given our shortened time frame that we're working under now, we want those enumerators to just really focus on the hardest, hard to count, hard to reach people. So if you are able to go online or call and do it over the phone, please do that right now. And then you don't have to worry about someone you don't know coming to your door, because again, any non-response household will get visited by a US Census taker. And if that's not something that you want to open your door for, or you're uncomfortable with that, then you must self-respond. These are the only two options available to us. Every 10 years, we are required and mandated in the Constitution to count every single person in the US. It's a huge lift, and the more you can do, and the best thing you can do, and the safest thing you can do is to self-respond on your own. Again, it takes less than 10 minutes. The data is confidential, and it will impact you and your community for 10 years. Especially as we think about what we're going through with COVID right now and virtual learning. All of these things, this post-COVID recovery, it's all driven by data. I was on a meeting last night and we were talking about laptops for kids in DC schools. We're able to provide that because we have funding for it based on our census data. We also know where school-age children live. So we're able to get that kind of thing, those devices focused in communities where we need them. When we think about post-COVID recovery and the dollars coming in for that, where do we need to focus those economic development efforts? Everything we do is driven by data, not just the funding, but the planning and the budgeting. I work for DC government, and first and foremost, we need to know who we're working for. So we want to make sure everyone is counted. Again, the folks most likely undercounted are typically African-American households, immigrant households, people of color, families with young children, they're really impacted by this. So again, if a census taker comes to your door, this is what to ask for. They should willingly show you an ID. That should not even be a question. They should be wearing it. Or you can call, the number here is on the bottom. And maybe we can email that out to folks later on so you have that number. Or you can just do it online right now. You don't need a unique ID, just put in your address and include every single person in your household. But again, I would urge you, avoid the knock on your door and self-respond right now. So hopefully as soon as we're done with our presentation today, you'll go to 2020census.gov and complete the census. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah, or thank you so much, Melissa. This is great information, and we will definitely email out this graphic, but also a link to where you can complete the census. Next up, we have Deborah Kennedy from the National Coalition of Literacy, and if you wait 1 second, I will get her slides up.
Deborah, you're going to have to unmute for us.
I will. I just did. I just realized that I had muted myself. Thank you, Sarah, for introducing me and for getting my slides up. I am the president of the National Coalition for Literacy. The NCL is the organization that advocates for adult education and career development with the federal government and also out into the states, but primarily with the federal government. So we're really focused on the role that the census plays in getting funding for things like adult education, career training, all of the services that the YWCA provides in that area, career education. Those are the things that we support and advocate for. And the census is really important for that because, as Melissa was saying, it determines how federal funding comes to the city of Washington and to the states for things like adult education and career development, as well as all the other things that you rely on: healthcare, housing, transportation. If you take the bus to get from one place to another, that kind of transportation is often supported by federal funding. And they determine how much federal funding comes to each area on the basis of the numbers that are provided by the census count. So that's why it's important for everyone to complete the census so that we have an accurate count of how many people there are that need to be served in our area. That's a total of over $1.5 trillion a year coming from the federal government out to the states and cities for this kind of support. So it's a big deal, a really big deal. The census also determines how many representatives we have in Congress for each state, and for the district, of course, we have Mrs. Norton. And finally, the census data is used by businesses to make planning and investment decisions. Businesses look at census data to figure out where they might find customers, where they might find employees, where they might want to build a new facility, open a new store. So again, it's important for everyone to complete the census so that businesses can make those kinds of decisions and provide you with the things that you need. This, as Melissa said, is the count for the next 10 years. This is the data, the information that will be used to make these decisions for the next 10 years. So if you have a child who is in 2nd grade, this is the data that will inform how much money your kids' schools get from the federal government all the way through that kid's senior year in high school. So it really is, again, a key thing to do, not just for yourself, but for your family and your community to complete the census and to be counted. Next slide, please, Sarah. The census, as Melissa said, is very easy to complete going online or whether you do it on the phone. It starts with a couple of broad questions. How many people live or stay in the residence that you're responding for? How many people altogether? And is the residence owned? Do you own it or do you rent it? And then it will ask, if you're the person completing for your household, it will ask for your phone number. That's so they can follow up with you if there's a question about any of your responses. It's unlikely that that would happen, but they do ask for that. Then for each person living in your household, you and everybody else, it asks for name, sex, age, and date of birth, whether you're of Hispanic or Latino ethnicity, and what your race is. And it has a list of checkboxes for the race, different race categories. That answer can be a little tricky because they have categories and you might not feel that you fit into one of them. You can fill in something different, a different answer. There's an other place to check other if you want to on the form. But that's all the information. That's all the questions there are. It's just 9 questions altogether. You fill out that information for each person living in your household. Make sure you include your children. Make sure you include your parents if they're living with you, or any other family members who are living with you. But it really is very quick and easy to answer those questions. You can see the questions and information about them if you go to this URL that's at the bottom of the slide on the census website. When you go to the census website, make sure that you go to 2020census.gov. That's the real census site. Don't go to 2020census.com. That's not the real census site. So make sure you're going to the .gov, the correct site. But you can get answers to your questions there. They have a whole resource section of answers to questions that people frequently ask. And our next slide, Sarah. What you need to do, you need to complete the census by September 30th. As Melissa said, as Dana said at the opening, you can respond online. There's the address to do it. It's easy. The site guides you through the process. You can respond by phone, calling 844-330-2020, or in Spanish, 844-468-2020. There is a list of phone numbers for other languages to be able to respond on the phone in other languages at the URL that's listed there, the Contact Us page on the census website. And Melissa mentioned there are quite a few other languages. And also, when you call, if they don't have a person right there who speaks your language, they will have someone contact you, call you back, who speaks your language. You can fill out your paper form. If you still have it, you have probably received at least 1 and maybe as many as 3. There is a set of paper forms, another mailing going out this month for the paper forms for people who haven't responded yet. So you may yet get another one in the mail as well. Or you can talk to a census enumerator, either when that person comes to your door, as Melissa was saying, knock, knock, they come to your door. Or you may see them at a mobile questionnaire assistance event. There are a few of those going on in communities where the response rates are low. That's where a census person is out there in the community and you can just go up to them and respond to the census. They'll have a tablet or a phone and will take your responses. This picture on the slide is one that the Census Bureau released several months ago to show what a census personnel person looks like. You see the bag with the census label on it. And she, in this case, is using a laptop. My understanding is that now they're more using tablets and phones rather than laptops, but still she has a badge on, which you can't quite see there, but that's what they look like. They have a number of different ways of identifying themselves as Census Bureau people, so you will know who they are. One final point that I wanted to make, coming back to the topic of education, and particularly adult education and career training. One of the things that the Census Bureau asks about, not on this census, but in the American Community Survey, is how old you are and then what your level of education is. So they have a way of enumerating how many people in an area are over 25 years old and have at least a college degree. If that number is high because the college educated people respond and the people who are still in adult ed or career training don't, then it looks like the area doesn't need as much money for adult education and career training. And so we don't get as much money. Organizations like the YWCA that provide those very important services won't receive the funding that they need to provide them. So please do what Melissa has urged you to do, what Dana has urged you to do. Complete the census in any way that's easiest for you. but get it done by September 30th. Thanks.
Thank you, Deborah. Appreciate all of this information, particularly different ways and different resources that the Census Bureau has created, especially for non-English speakers, and giving people a lot of opportunity to fill out the census in the way that they feel most comfortable. So thank you so much. I'm gonna pass this over to Dana. We have a few questions for our guests.
Yes, Deborah and Melissa, thank you so much for pointing out that there is another mailing coming out. And I know Melissa and I had a conversation a few days ago about a QR code that's available in the community. That's very easy for you to use. If you're familiar with using it with your cell phone, you just simply scan that QR code with your cell phone, and it literally pops right up on your phone, and you're able to complete the census that way as well. So I do have a couple of questions, a few questions, Sarah and I. And the first one I have, and I want to ask Melissa this question. What are some of the myths about the census?
I think that, well, certainly one of the biggest myths right now is that the data is going to be used for purposes it's not intended to. I think the level of distrust in this current administration, and when I mean administration, I mean the federal level, not our local one, I think is higher than it's ever been. And I think there's good reason for that. There have been a lot of changes that seem to have come out of like left field. So I do think that, but the law is very clear. The data is for statistical purposes. It can never be shared with any law enforcement, local, state, or federal. It can't be shared with the court system. It's not going to be used against you as you apply for benefits. And it's also important to note it cannot be shared with your landlord. So if you have folks living in your apartment or house that maybe aren't on your lease or they shouldn't be there, that information will never be shared with your landlord or any kind of local housing enforcement. So I think that's a big concern. And that's how rumors get started, that this is going to be used for ICE or to deport people. That is not, the law is very, very clear on how strictly protected this data is. And so that's why we always just keep emphasizing that it doesn't matter where you're from, how long you've been here, or how you got here, or what kind of documentation you may or may not have. We are here to count every single person, and that data will be protected.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm glad that you did point out how confidential this information will be for our communities and how strictly guarded it will be to make folks hopefully feel more comfortable with completing the census today. Hopefully today, people go out and complete the census today. Deborah, I have a question for you. What services are affected by the census response for the next 10 years? You kind of alluded to that for us, but if you could kind of share some more detail.
Right, sure. So specific services, all of the social services that you can think of are actually supported by the federal government to a great degree. So Medicare and Medicaid, for sure, there's a big part of that funding, that healthcare funding, and also funding for hospitals and other health clinics and health providers is supported by the federal government, and they determine how much money to use for those on the basis of census numbers. With regard to food and nutrition, your SNAP benefits are determined, level of SNAP benefits in every area are determined by census data. Housing support, including Section 8 housing, the government determines how much money to distribute for that on the basis of census data. Roads and bridges, street paving, buses and trains, all kinds of transportation is supported by the federal government in different ways. And again, they use census data to look at the number of people who live there and therefore how much money might be needed for that service. And most important of all, in my perspective, education, both for your children and for yourselves. All levels of education from kindergarten and pre-K all the way through the end of high school and into community college, as well as adult education and career training. All of those are supported by federal dollars, and the amount of that money is again determined by census data. So go today and fill out your census form.
Thank you, Deborah, especially for pointing out adult education and career training, because as you know, the YWCA Career Education and Training Center, that is our focus to help DC residents become employed and, of course, obtain their high school diplomas while they're with us as well.
Well, and Dana, one thing that I would add, there is also some federal support for employer-based training. And that, again, uses census data to determine how much support to provide. So there's all kinds of ways that this really affects the lives of everybody who completes the census.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that as well. Sarah?
So I wanted to ask a question about what I always like to give people a kind of a quick hit, 3-sentence, hey, dear neighbor, dear family member who hasn't filled out the census. I want to know, what do I say to my neighbor or my family member that hasn't filled out the census, and tell them why it's important in 2 or 3 sentences. Deborah or Melissa, either, or both of you actually, if you would like.
I would start with that you just filled it out and how easy it is to do. I know people right now are inundated with things online, and the thought of going online and doing something else seems like really tedious. So I think you would say, like, I just did it and it really took me 5 minutes. It was so easy and fast, and it's, so I would start with that and just say, look, you can do this from home. You can do it from your phone. Like, don't wait for someone to come knock on your door and collect that information in person. Just do it. And what else can you do that takes less than 10 minutes that helps your community for 10 years?
Right. I agree. That's a really important point. And the other thing that I would say is, you matter. You're important. And this is your way of saying, I'm here and I count, and my community and I are important. And we need and deserve the funding and the support that the census gives to our community. So it's your way to say, I'm here, I'm important, I count, my community matters, my family matters.
Thank you so much. I just want to bring it out to people that are following along. If anyone has a quick question, let us know. Or if there's anything that you have, what would essentially motivate you to fill out the census if you haven't filled it out yet. Maybe we can answer some of those. If not, that's okay too.
Well, we're waiting for that, Sarah. I just want to come back to the question about myths about the census and reiterate one thing that Melissa alluded to. There is no citizenship question on the census. There's no citizenship question on the census. It does not ask whether you're a US citizen or not. And the reason that's important is everyone in the United States, everyone living in the United States is supposed to complete the census, whether they're a citizen or not. Everyone matters, everyone counts.
Thank you, Deborah, for mentioning that.
Yes, please go.
Hi, everyone. My question is, first of all, I filled it out, and I've been trying to encourage my family members, and I'm going to continue to encourage them if they haven't. I don't know, but I just sent out tech the groups. So anyway, I wanted to know, in light of them, decreasing the time for completing the census by a month, what is you all's gauge in terms of how, the possibility of getting 100%, especially when you have to, as far as sending out the enumerators? And then a second question is, you gave the percentage of DC in terms of who's completed the census. Do you all have any idea how the other states are doing? Just, maybe not all, but just some.
I do. I live and breathe tracking data every single day. So the national self-response rate is about 3.5% higher than us. So it's about 64%. And we've been about 3.5% behind the national rate for the last couple of months, but we are still increasing a little bit every single day. So we have not stagnated yet. I think the national rate and most states, not just DC, are all behind where they were for the 2010 census. So this has been a census unlike any other. I do have concerns about an undercount, and you know, I don't think that's unique to DC. I hear this from the US Census folks too. They would like to see an extension of the deadline. And, you know, the most important thing is not just getting the full count, but making sure the data is as accurate as possible.
Yes.
So there's kind of two things going on here. One, we have until September 30th to count 40% of the households almost nationally, not just in DC. That's a huge number. And then once the census ends, the US Census goes through the data. They look for duplicates and other kind of odd things, and they basically clean the data up on the back end to make sure that's accurate. And then that number is what is submitted to the White House at the end of this calendar year. And typically they spend usually 6 months doing that, because the census usually wraps up in July, typically in a normal, you know, time. Mm-hmm. And then they submit it at the end of December. So I think that's going to be, it's tight on this end right now to collect the information. And then it's tight on the back end for the census to go through the data. So I do have concerns, and I work with my counterparts all around the country, and we all have the same concerns. You know, we just don't control that timeline, and we have to work with what we're given. And that's why the sense of urgency is real. There's not a do-over on, you know, October 1st.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
There is a large collaboration of organizations, social service organizations, and other types of organizations across the country pushing for an extension of the time, specifically for that reason, to allow the Census Bureau the time it needs to really analyze the data and make sure that it's correct. That's being coordinated by the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. They have been pushing for it, working with Senate and Hill staffers, not moving very far on that so far. But if you are in touch with any of your senators or your representative, feel free to email or call their offices and encourage them to, Congress can make this decision to extend that deadline. So that we're sure we get an accurate count.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Schmidt.
You're welcome.
Dana, do you want to close us out?
I do. We've had a great time together with you ladies and guests. We appreciate everything that you've been able to share with us today. Melissa Bird with DC Census 2020 and Deborah Kennedy with National Coalition for Literacy. They've given us some great information. We thank you again for your time and the valuable information that you've shared. Everyone, I want to encourage you to visit 2020census.gov, 2020census.gov to get more information and to complete your census today. Also, if you need additional information about us and what we're doing in the community at the YWCA National Capital Area, our website is ywcanca.org. That's ywcanca.org. You can visit our Facebook page. This will be live. Please share this information with all your friends, contacts, groups. We really need to get the country involved in completing the census before September 30th. And if you need or have any additional questions, you can reach out to us as well at our website, and we'd be glad to assist you. And remember to register to vote if you haven't done that already. It's very important. It goes along with the census and goes a long way with what will happen over the next, 68 days countdown, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's a very big fall. It's a very critical fall.
Yes, yes. So again, deadline for census is September 30th. Complete the census today, 2020census.gov, and the ywcanca.org is our website. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.